and welcome back to She Investigates, the podcast where we investigate all things weird. Today, we have a story for you that is straight out of a horror film. But first, let's catch up. I wanted to do a birthday shout out, first of all, to my cute daughter, Emily. She is actually going to be 9 years old tomorrow, and I cannot believe that she is that old. Time just flies. But a fun fact about her birthday is that the year that she was born, March 27th, was actually Easter. And we were doing Easter baskets with her older brother. He was like 2 at the time. And I went into labor. And so we were rushing around trying to get the hospital bag and everything ready because she came early. And while we were doing that, my older son got into all the candy in his Easter basket and ate an entire bag of Dum Dum Suckers, which was hilarious. But it was also cute because on the floor that I delivered her on, the nurses had knitted a bunch of little hats that looked like bunny ears for all of the babies that were born on Easter. So she got one of those cute bunny ear hats, and we actually had her pictures taken in it because it was so cute. But I just wanted to wish her a very happy birthday. She is the cutest girl. She's so fun to be around. She's a little social butterfly. And one thing that I really love about her is that she is just always thinking about other people's feelings and concerned about other people's feelings. And she also just recently started piano lessons. That's another fun fact about her. So, happy birthday, Emily. We love you. Secondly, the weather is finally warming up in Utah, and I am so excited about it. Seasonal depression, man, it's real. And I feel like so many people suffer from it. Like, we're just not meant to live in cold climates. Like, we need the sun. We need to feel the sun on our face. But we're finally coming out of the seasonal depression, and now I just get to deal with regular depression and anxiety. But I am really excited that it's warming up, and I'm trying to start getting into walking, going on walks in the morning, which it's been super hard to motivate myself. But maybe since I'm telling all of you that I'm trying to get into it, maybe it'll give me a little bit more accountability to actually get out and do it. Speaking of warm weather, it's going to be our spring break next week for our kids. And we actually aren't going anywhere this year. We're just going to be hanging around town. We did get tickets for the new Minecraft movie, and we'll probably go to like a couple parks. And then we have plans with some of my kids' cousins to go to Crystal Hot Springs, which is just kind of like a water park, but with really, really warm water. So we're excited about that, to hang out with cousins. But it's going to kind of be crazy next week to get my episode out. I feel like ever since I started this podcast, my life has just gotten like bonkers, crazy chaos, and it's a struggle every week to get an episode out. And speaking of summer, I do want to give you guys a little bit of a heads up that I am planning to take the first few weeks of summer off from recording my podcast. And that's just kind of so that I can like get ahead on recording and then hopefully be able to take the rest of the summer off, because I'm telling you, it is next to impossible to record with my kids around. I love them, but somebody always needs a snack or a drink, or there's a fight to break up. So just a heads up that I'm going to take those first couple of weeks off. I am a stay-at-home mom right now, which all of my kids are in school now, so I am looking at going back to work, but that's like another subject in and of itself. But all of my kids are in school now, and so I spend my days like cleaning the house and running errands and stuff. And I gotta tell you guys, it wears you out. And I told my husband, this is the analogy that I always use when I talk about being a stay-at-home mom, is I always tell my husband, like, imagine that you spent all day at work just like working on a file or working on a project, and you get it perfect. It's done. You're so proud of it. And then somebody comes over and takes that file and puts it in the shredder and shreds your entire day of work. And that's basically what it's like when my kids come home from school every day. Is I've spent the whole day cleaning and making the house look nice and organizing, and then they like roll in like the little tornadoes that they are, and it doesn't even look like I did anything. So just the struggles of being a stay-at-home mom. I'm sure there's a lot of you out there that can relate, but I am doing my best to keep on top of this podcast, because it really has been so fun for me so far to be able to look up these cases and to be able to record my podcast. So I'm not going anywhere. I just may take a little break at the beginning of summer so that I can spend some time with my kids. And with that, let's jump into today's case. Today, we are unraveling a case that has haunted investigators, a family, and really an entire community for over 4 decades. This is the story of Dorothy Jane Scott, a devoted mother, a woman seemingly with no enemies who vanished into the night in 1980, only for her family to be tormented by an anonymous caller for years after. So we've all seen those horror films where somebody receives a call from a blocked number and the caller begins telling their victim what they're doing, what they're wearing, and it becomes obvious pretty quickly that they're being watched. But it's just a movie, right? Well, for Dorothy Jane Scott, that movie became a reality. Dorothy Jane Scott was a 32-year-old single mother, and she was living in Stanton, California in 1980. She worked as a secretary for Swinger's Psych Shop and Custom John's Head Shop, and those 2 stores were actually owned by her father and located in Anaheim. She was known for her kindness, her quiet nature, and her strong religious beliefs. She was deeply devoted to her cute 4-year-old son, Sean, and she spent much of her free time with her parents, Vera and Jacob Scott. And they actually helped take care of Sean for her while she was working. She was described as cautious, responsible, and somebody who avoided unnecessary risks. Unlike a lot of people that were her age at the time, she didn't smoke, she didn't drink, she didn't use drugs, and she wasn't someone that would seek attention. And she didn't live a life that seemed to invite danger in. She attended church regularly and had a small but close-knit circle of friends. She was even described by one friend as, quote, dull as a phone book, end quote. That's a little sad. That's not a super nice friend. But her life basically was her job and her son. She didn't really have much of a social life, and that's the way that she liked it. She liked just going to work and then coming home and spending time with her parents and her son. She had once been in a relationship with Sean's father, but by 1980, they weren't together anymore, and she was really just focusing all of her energy on providing a stable life for her son. Her priorities were really simple: work, family, and faith. But someone, somewhere, had become obsessed with her. Several months before her disappearance, Dorothy confided in her parents and her close friends that she'd started getting these phone calls from an anonymous man. He would profess his love for her one minute and threaten her life the next. He told her he was watching her and even described intimate details of her daily life. Things that no one should have known unless they were following her. He knew what she was wearing. He knew what her routine was like. This would creep me out. I would be hitting the block number button so fast. But, this wasn't a cell phone. Obviously, we're talking about the 80s here. So this was her home phone number that she was receiving these calls on. And she told her friends that this guy's voice sounded familiar to her, but she just couldn't quite place it. One day, the caller actually told her that he had a surprise for her and to go outside. So she went outside. Why did she do that? This is why I say it's like a horror film, because it's like, I would not be going outside. I would be locking my door, closing my blinds, hiding in my basement. But she went outside and she found a dead rose left on the hood of her car. And that's when she knew that these weren't just empty words. Somebody was really, truly stalking her. And she was deeply unsettled by this. Her parents actually urged her to go to the police, but there was little they could do without knowing who the caller was. And at the time, the laws against stalking were not as strong as they are today. And even today, I feel like the laws against stalking still aren't where they should be. I feel like there's still a lot that they can't do today if somebody's stalking you. Dorothy was so frightened by the calls that she started taking a self-defense class just so she would be able to protect herself if something did happen. She even considered buying a gun for protection, but she ultimately decided against it, and that was because she was looking out for the safety of her son and trying to kind of maintain a sense of normalcy despite all of these weird phone calls that she was getting. So on the night of May 28th, 1980, Dorothy was actually called to work for an emergency meeting. and she dropped off her son at her parents' house so that they could babysit him while she was away at this work meeting. And during the meeting, she noticed that her coworker, Conrad Bostron, looked ill. He had a red mark on his arm that looked like some rash of some kind. And by the end of the meeting, he just did not look good. And Dorothy actually insisted on taking him to the hospital. And one of her colleagues, a woman named Pam Head, offered to go with them. So Dorothy was the one that drove, and they stopped by her parents' house on the way to the hospital just so she could let her parents know what was going on. Remember, this was the 80s, and she couldn't just call or shoot off a quick text, and she didn't want her parents to worry if she wasn't back later than she said she would be. Also, while she was at her parents', she quickly changed her scarf that she was wearing from a black scarf to a red one. And that will be important later on, so keep that in mind. After being seen by the doctors, it turned out that Conrad had been bitten by a black widow spider, which, side note, that's one of my worst fears. I don't know if anybody else grew up being terrified of black widow spiders, but yeah, I did. So not fun, and Dorothy was deeply concerned for his health. After checking him in at the UC Irvine Medical Center, Dorothy actually waited with Pam in the waiting room, just chatting and reading magazines until Conrad received treatment. And he was actually there until 11 p.m. And that's when he was discharged. So while they were waiting, Dorothy never left Pam's side. That's also an important detail that you're going to want to remember for later. It means that if somebody had been watching Dorothy that night, they must have already been waiting outside the hospital. So Conrad gets discharged, and Dorothy offered to pull her car up to the entrance while Pam and Conrad finished up with his prescription. That way, he wouldn't have to walk all the way through the parking lot, and they could just get in the car and go. But when Pam and Conrad stepped outside, Dorothy and her car weren't pulled up to the curb. They waited a few minutes, and then they started getting annoyed. They just wanted to get home. They'd been at the hospital a long time. Conrad probably still wasn't feeling great. But finally, they see her car driving towards them. But something didn't seem quite right. The high beams were on, and the car didn't slow down as it got closer. It was going really fast for a parking lot. So they tried to get her attention by waving as she drove by, but the high beams actually prevented them from being able to see Dorothy in the car and see if she had noticed them. And the car drove right past them to the exit of the parking lot and sped away. So Pam and Conrad, they assumed that maybe an emergency had come up or she'd forgotten something. But when they didn't hear back from Dorothy, they grew concerned. And they actually waited a couple of hours for Dorothy at the hospital, but she never came back. Finally, they spoke to hospital security and told them what was going on, and they called Dorothy's parents to see if she had made it home, which she hadn't. And her parents, they automatically wanted to call the police. And they were met with the usual resistance that you get when trying to report a missing adult. She was a grown woman at this point, and she could go wherever she wanted to go. And they assured the family that she was going to be back soon and there was nothing to worry about. But if you remember from earlier, this was very out of character for Dorothy. She was a responsible mother who wouldn't have stranded her friends, let alone left her son in the care of her parents longer than necessary. And her parents, they just felt kind of stuck. The police were not taking this case very seriously at all. But they soon would. And that's because hours later, her car, a white Toyota station wagon, was found about 10 miles away, abandoned in an alleyway in Santa Ana. Not only that, it was engulfed in flames. Her belongings were found in the vehicle, but there was no sign of Dorothy. She was just gone. And after this, the police finally started investigating, but not before warning Dorothy's parents to avoid talking to the media. And then came the calls. Even though Dorothy was missing, these weird phone calls that she had been receiving kept coming, only now they were directed towards her mother. A week after Dorothy's disappearance, her mother, Vera Scott, received a chilling phone call. "Are you related to Dorothy Scott?" a male voice asked. "Yes," Vera replied. "I've got her," the caller said before hanging up. After hearing about the call, Jacob decided not to avoid talking to the media like the police had requested. He talked to the Santa Ana Register, a local newspaper, and they ran an article about it. And the very same day the article ran, The editor of the paper received a call similar to the ones that Dorothy and her parents had received, and the caller wanted to talk about Dorothy. He said, "I killed her. She was my love. I caught her cheating with another man. She denied having anyone else. I killed her." Strangely, the caller also knew things that hadn't even been released in the media yet. He knew that she was wearing a red scarf that night and not the black one that she had been wearing earlier in the day. And he knew that she had taken Conrad to the hospital that night and that he had been bit by a black widow spider. He claimed Dorothy called her from the hospital and gave him this info, but remember, Pam was with Dorothy that whole night, except for when Dorothy went to the bathroom right before they left, and she said that Dorothy never made any phone calls. So, for the next 4 years, yes, 4 years, these calls continue every Wednesday night, like clockwork. The phone would ring, and the voice would taunt Vera, saying things like, "I killed her," or "She was my love." But strangely enough, the caller always seemed to only call when she was home alone, never when her husband Jacob was with her. The police obviously tried to trace these phone calls, but this man was careful and he never stayed on the line long enough to be tracked. He seemed to know when Vera would be home, always timing his calls so perfectly. It was almost like he was watching her too. And he told Dorothy's mother horrible things about Dorothy. He claimed he was holding her prisoner and torturing her, and he just seemed to be reveling in her parents' pain. The family even tried changing their number, but the calls just kept coming. It was as if the man always found a way to reach them, heightening the fear and pain of Dorothy's absence. Then one day, Jacob happened to be home when the call came in and picked up the phone. The caller said nothing after this, and the calls actually stopped for a while, which is very strange. We'll hit on that a little bit later. 4 years passed, and then in 1984, a construction worker discovered human remains off of Santa Ana Canyon Road. Alongside them were a dog's remains, a turquoise ring, which was one that Dorothy's family immediately recognized, and also a watch that had stopped at 12:30 a.m. on May 29th, 1980. And Dorothy went missing on the night of May 28th. So through dental records, they were able to confirm that it was indeed Dorothy Scott. Her remains showed signs of partial burning, but the cause of death was undetermined. Had she been killed that night in 1980? Had she been kept alive for some time? The authorities really just had no idea. After her body was found, the mystery caller actually called just 2 more times after this, asking if Dorothy was home and then hanging up. And then, just as suddenly as they began, the phone calls to Dorothy's mother just stopped. So as it is usually the case, the first suspect was her ex-boyfriend, her son's father. But he was able to prove that he wasn't in California at the time. He was all the way in Missouri. But one thing was clear. Dorothy had a stalker. The caller had claimed to the newspaper that he was Dorothy's boyfriend. But her parents said she wasn't seeing anyone. She rarely went out at all. It was also clear that the caller had been watching Dorothy when he called her because he always knew what she was wearing and what she was doing. He also, though, must have been watching her parents because he knew when her mom was going to be home all alone to call. Some people have speculated that the calls stopped after Jacob picked up the phone because Jacob knew the caller and would have recognized his voice. Remember, Dorothy herself said she recognized the voice but just couldn't place who that voice belonged to. And this theory assumes that the caller knew both Dorothy and Jacob in real life and had spoken to both of them. So this leads us to believe that maybe the caller was connected to the shop where Dorothy worked, the one that was owned by her father. Jacob was around quite often at the shop, and based on what we know about Dorothy's social life, it's highly likely that the person that was calling her knew her from work. I also watched a YouTube video about this case by Stephanie Harlow, and she brought up a lot of really good points that I hadn't even thought of. Like, what do we know about Pam and Conrad? Honestly, like next to nothing. Why did Pamela even offer to go with Dorothy and Conrad to the hospital in the first place? Was it so that they could alibi each other? They claimed they couldn't see Dorothy behind the wheel because of the high beams, which is also kind of convenient. The caller also knew about the Black Widow bite and that Dorothy had changed into a red scarf before heading to the hospital. Both things that probably only Conrad and Pam knew. I mean, Conrad obviously didn't fake a Black Widow bite. There's no way that you could do that. But is there proof that he was actually ever checked into the hospital for treatment, or is that just what the cops assumed? Stephanie Harlow suggested that maybe Pam or Conrad were working together or with someone else to make Dorothy disappear. We really don't know what work, if any, was done to corroborate their story. Like, we don't know how deep into their story / alibi the police dug in this situation. It just seemed off that Pamela volunteered to go with Dorothy and Conrad to the hospital. And it's also strange that Conrad and Pamela claimed that they were waiting at the hospital for a few hours before they called anybody. This is 11 p.m. at night, and they're just sitting around for a couple of hours waiting for Dorothy to come back. Like, why did they wait so long? It was so late. I'm sure they just wanted to get home, but instead they just waited. So the question is it possible that they had time to kill her, move her body somewhere, set her car on fire, and then still get back to the hospital in time to start reporting details to security and Dorothy's family? It's also really weird to me that they even reported this to security in the first place. Like, yes, they saw Dorothy leave, but I don't really understand exactly what they were reporting. Like, they were reporting that their friend ditched them and left them without a ride home. But again, reporting it helped strengthen their alibi. It's also possible that the stalker was waiting for her at her vehicle, and that when Conrad and Pam saw the car coming towards them, Dorothy wasn't even the one driving. They were blinded by the high beams, and they really couldn't even be sure that she was the one that was driving the car. So that would explain the erratic behavior of the vehicle. And if it was her stalker, that could have been anybody. Stalkers don't necessarily always pick their victims based on if they know them or not. It could have been somebody totally random who just saw her out and about one day and developed an obsession with her and was a complete stranger to her. He could have just been following her everywhere, and that's how he knew everything about her. And he may have even followed her to the hospital and heard the doctors tell them that her friend had been bit by a Black Widow, and that's how he knew that information. There's some theories that Dorothy was actually in contact with her stalker that night and spoke to him on the phone at the hospital. So is it possible that he threatened her son, or that she found a note on her windshield from her stalker, and that's what prompted her quick exit? But why didn't she tell anybody before leaving, or at least call her parents from inside the hospital before going wherever the stalker told her to go? There is another additional theory around a man named Mike Butler. Mike Butler was reportedly familiar with Dorothy, and he had ties to the same religious circle. So some of these rumors suggest that he might have had an unhealthy fixation on her, and his sister actually worked at one of the shops where Dorothy was employed, so there was a connection there. And he himself actually worked at an auto shop that was in very close proximity to the shop where Dorothy worked. Those that knew this Mike Butler guy described him as an eccentric individual, and that he was just had a volatile personality and an obsessive streak. And some people believed that he did possess these stalker-like tendencies. And there was even speculation that he had fixated on Dorothy in an unhealthy way. But despite these rumors, there was no concrete evidence linking him to Dorothy's disappearance or those phone calls that she'd received. So law enforcement reportedly considered him a person of interest, but with no evidence, they weren't really able to pursue any type of charges. And to this day, Butler remains one of the most widely discussed but unconfirmed potential suspects in this case. However, he has since passed away, taking any secrets that he might have had to the grave. And I have one final theory for you, and that has to do with the infamous Golden State Killer. Before he became the Golden State Killer, he was actually known as the original Night Stalker, and he was actually active in California at this time. Two of his victims, Keith and Patricia Harrington, have ties to UCI, which is the same hospital that Dorothy was last seen at. Patricia was a nurse there, and Keith was a fourth-year medical student. Now, this was in 1975, but this killer continued to terrorize the area for many years. And one piece of evidence that just didn't seem to fit anywhere in this case is the dog that was buried with Dorothy. One theory is that the dog's remains were placed there to confuse or trick cops, because if they were using cadaver dogs and they hit on this location, the police would dig and come upon the remains of the dog first, and maybe they would think that that's all that the cadaver dogs were detecting, and they wouldn't keep looking any further, which would leave her body hidden. So pairing this with the knowledge that we have about the caller always knowing when to get off the phone so that the calls couldn't be traced, it kind of makes it seem like whoever was stalking her had a pretty good understanding of police protocol. And surprise, surprise, Joseph D'Angelo, who was later charged with being the Golden State Killer and arrested in 2018 after DNA from a genealogy site was used to track him down, was a Vietnam vet. He became a police officer in 1973, and he worked in Northern California for 6 years. He terrorized men and women alike for years. And before he started his murders, he started off by stalking people before he progressed to murder. So we know that Dorothy was being stalked for months. Is it possible that she was one of his original victims? Maybe. But unfortunately, with no solid evidence, no known enemies, and no DNA testing available at the time, no arrests were ever made, and to this day, the case remains unsolved. Dorothy Jane Scott's story is terrifying, and not just because of what happened to her, but because of just how little sense it makes. How does a woman with no known enemies become the target of a deranged stalker? How does somebody vanish in a matter of seconds, only for their remains to be found 4 years later with no real answers? 40 years later, and we still don't know who took Dorothy. But what we do know is that somewhere out there, somebody does. Maybe that person is still alive. I mean, this was only the 80s. Maybe they still remember the calls, the stalking, the fear they inflicted. Maybe, just maybe, the truth will come to light one day. And until then, Dorothy's case remains just another dark mystery, one that lingers in the shadows, waiting for justice. Thank you so much for listening to today's case. This was a crazy one for me, and I'm really interested to know which one of the potential theories that we presented you guys are leaning most towards. Do you think it was Conrad and Pam? Do you think it was a random stalker? What about Mike Butler? Do you think it was him? Or are you going to go with the infamous Golden State Killer? I'm not sure which one I believe, but I'd really like to know more about Conrad and Pam. The YouTube video that I watched, Stephanie Harlow said she tried to dive into their past and find out more about them to try to make this whole situation make sense, but she could not find any information on them on the internet. And her theory is that potentially maybe their names were changed to protect their identities when the news story was written, but I'd like to know more about them. So let me know which theory you're leaning towards, and we will be back next week with an all new episode. If you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate it if you could give me a 5-star review or leave me a comment. Follow us on Instagram. I post pictures every week from the different cases so that you can put a name and a face together, make that connection. It's really fun. And yeah, I will see you guys next week. And until then, I'll keep snooping so you don't have to. This is She Investigates, signing off.